Welcome back. Norman Finkelstein, I'm curious as to how your situation is in the United States. From checking your website, you still have quite a busy schedule. You're still touring many university campuses. You're speaking in many forums. A few years back, it was quite a difficult hall. It was quite tough. Halls were quite scarce, or at least full with people who were you know, there to jeer or to criticize or to attack. Do you see a shift in reception in...
Oh yeah, it's perfectly obvious. It's obvious even here. When I've now been here, I think, I can't keep track anymore, but I've been here I think for 7 days.
Yes.
And I was at Manchester, Sussex, Cambridge, Oxford, Birkbeck, LSE. And for example, the first night when I was going to speak at Manchester, I was warned the people in the audience, and they have the usual security guards.
There was a petition demanding that the whole event be scrapped.
Nothing happens. And I speak at perhaps inordinate length, and I always say, now that you've been respectful of me, I give the floor over to dissenters.
Yes.
Who wants to dissent? Nobody dissents. There is nothing. It's changed dramatically. And the same thing is pretty much true in the United States. The other side, it's falling apart. It's pretty obvious to anyone who watches it. Even at Oxford yesterday, they're debating a resolution whether Israel should have the right to exist. Now, I think the resolution is absurd. Of course, Israel has the right to exist. It's a member state of the United Nations, and like every other state in the United Nations, it has the right to be free from threats or use of force. Of course, if we say Israel within its pre-June 67 borders and all the rest. But even debating the resolution, you know, it means that Israel's stock is dropping precipitously. I understand, I never stayed around for the vote. I understand the vote was quite close. You know, things have changed a lot. I ultimately lost the battle for tenure, but at my university. But I think that was basically for pretty unusual reasons. First of all, Professor Dershowitz went on what Noam Chomsky called a jihad against me. And he created a kind of climate of national hysteria to delegitimize me. A lot of it succeeded because the university where I taught was a very small university, probably never encountered the kind of hysteria and hullabaloo that developed around my case. Didn't quite know what to do. But in general, when I actually speak and people hear me out, I get very few objections. Even at Oxford, if you're familiar with the format, people are allowed to interject during remarks, point of information, point of this. Of the four invited speakers, I was the only one that nobody, and there were many people who were hostile to me as a person. Not one said point of information. Because I'm, as everyone understands when you listen to me, I'm perfectly reasonable. I just want to end a conflict on terms which will give mutual respect and mutual dignity to all parties to the conflict. And those are the terms which Palestinians and the Arab League have accepted. In March 2002, again March 2007, they put forth the Arab League initiative. All 22 countries in the Arab League agreed to it, and it's a perfectly reasonable proposal and in line with the entire world community. And that's all I'm advocating. I have no desire any longer, maybe as a kid I did, but it's long past, you know, to be a firebrand. People are suffering. If you're a serious moral actor, your first commitment is not to your ego, but to try to diminish the suffering of those who are suffering, to lessen their torment.
The kind of talk today about whether the solution to the issue of Palestine and Israel is, you know, two-state solution, the one-state solution, this, that. What of the proposals being talked about there that you find the most realistic, the most reasonable?
Well, you know, there's a basic principle of politics. Mao Zedong, during the 1970s, he was famously quoted for saying, a basic principle of politics is unite the many to defeat the few. You have to find a broad consensus which is going to isolate your enemies and expose them as being the main obstacle to reason and justice. There is a consensus in the world how to resolve the conflict. It's not a speculative matter. We all know it because there's a record. Every year, the United Nations General Assembly in November, every single year, it votes on what's called the peaceful settlement of Palestine question. I'm sure none of your listeners has ever heard of it, and you probably haven't heard of it. Every year. And the vote, and it's the two-state settlement, full Israeli withdrawal to its June 67 border, a Palestinian state within the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem as its capital, and some sort of resolution of the Palestinian refugee question in accordance with Resolution 194, the compensation or return resolution. Every year the vote is the same. It just happened this past year. 161 countries on one side, the United States and Israel on the other, including the UK on the 161 side. It's just the US and Israel, and then there are 5 other countries every year: Nauru, Palau, Tuvalu, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. That's literally it. I mean, people like yourself, you're about to laugh. That's because the whole reality is laughable. Everybody's trying to pretend this is such a complicated conflict, this is such a controversial conflict, it's not amenable to simple solutions. We need President Bush's vision in order to help us make our way. This is not complicated. When the World Court had to rule on its issues, it wasn't a close vote. I told you it was 14-1. And even the one dissenter basically agreed. When it comes before the UN, there's no controversy. The whole world on one side, the US and Israel on the other side. And that's the obstacle. So, following Mao Zedong's precept, unite the many to defeat the few, our burden now is tell the world what the facts are. It's not complicated, it's not controversial. The world has agreed how to solve it. Most people don't know that. They're really taken in by the Israeli propaganda, which the press repeats, that who knows how to solve it. No, there is a way to solve it. And everyone agrees on how to solve it. And so I'm not going to the one-state solution, because the one state means uniting the few to defeat the many. I'm going to have to do battle with the whole world community. I'm going to have to do battle with the world court. I'm not going there. That's not politics. That's posturing. I want to win on fair terms, not winning by the simple application of force, but uniting public opinion and isolating the enemies of justice and reason. That's how we should win. And I think we can do it.
Even if you go back to the statements and rhetoric of Hamas over recent years, the late Ahmed Yassin, Khalid Mish'al, they spoke of let's go back to the 1967 borders, and then we'll declare a 10-year cessation,
20-year truce,
a 20-year truce or whatever, and we'll talk.
And then we'll see what happens.
And that, in a sense, falls within that whole premise.
Everybody understands that. You open up this, open up the newspaper of the Financial Times. They have an editorial on the Gaza events. And it says at the end of the editorial, it's absolutely reasonable. They say it has to be a state, a Palestinian state, in the West Bank and Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Once you give that to the Palestinians, then we'll talk about mutual recognition and end it. Everyone understands that. The problem is the US and Israel.